Okay, let's unpack this. We have an incredibly dense stack of material today covering global and regional headlines from, well, basically the last 24 hours. It's everything from an international ceasefire that seems to be shaky right out of the gate down to really specific details like a dangerous driving arrest here in El Salvador. Our mission today isn't just to summarize, We want to cut through the noise, give you the essential context, and maybe try to explain why these things that seem totally separate, Gaza, the Caribbean, the streets of El Rosario, might actually be connected.
Yeah, what's really striking is just the sheer volume of these really high-stakes international things happening at the exact same time as critical domestic issues. Things demanding huge budget commitments right here. We're trying to connect the dots today on, like you said, peace plans that look like they're failing before they even start, some serious geopolitical accusations that could really reshape regional conflicts, and then bring it right down to local crime, public safety, economic indicators, even major sports news. It's a lot, but it paints a fascinating picture.
Absolutely. We really have to start with the global instability, I think, because it just dominates the headlines right now. Two really worrying flashpoints. Let's kick off with the very delicate situation with the Israel-Gaza truce. Specifically, the fact that an agreement was confirmed, but, well, it faced challenges almost immediately.
Indeed. So the core fact is that Israel, Hamas, and the mediators involved all confirmed they've reached a consensus. At least on the first phase of this thing, they're calling the Trump peace plan for Gaza. Now, this framework has been worked on for months, right? The idea is a staged withdrawal, normalization. But this first phase, it's huge because it all hangs on a prisoner for hostage exchange. That's the linchpin.
And the U.S. president himself came out publicly setting expectations for that exchange. He assured everyone that the hostages would return probably Monday. And that exchange is the key lever, isn't it? Getting those hostages out in return for releasing a large number of Palestinian prisoners currently held by Israel.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the second that agreement was announced, the internal tension inside Israel just spiked. You saw this immediate, almost visceral political backlash, particularly from the right wing of the Israeli government. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, he was right out there.
Oh, Smotrich was very public, wasn't he? And very aggressive in his language. He put out a post on X basically saying that after the hostages are safely released, which he says he supports the state must immediately, and I'm quoting here, continue fighting with all its forces for the true eradication of Hamas and the demilitarization of Gaza. I mean, that doesn't sound like someone backing a peace plan, does it?
No, it absolutely highlights a fundamental contradiction. For Smotrich, and presumably for the people he represents, this truce seems to be purely a humanitarian pause. An operational necessity, maybe, but not a step towards actual peace. He specifically talked about an immense fear in parts of Israeli society, fear about this exchange mechanism, the idea of releasing potentially hundreds of Palestinians accused of terrorism as part of the deal. His argument, his fear, is that these individuals will just go straight back to organized violence, and that compromises Israeli security in the long run.
So Smotrich is essentially saying, okay, we'll do the exchange, but then all bets are off. He's threatening to undermine the whole political process right after the hostages are back, positioning the deal as like a necessary evil, a tactical sacrifice maybe. Does that kind of internal political pressure, does it have the power to actually stop the exchange? Or is it just posturing for his base back home?
It's probably a bit of both, We should definitely note that the Israeli foreign minister did say publicly he would vote for the plan. So there is some level of consensus, it seems. But Smotrich carries significant political weight. His criticism forces a public debate about what the ultimate goal is. If the goal really is the total eradication of Hamas, as he says, then, well, a truce and a prisoner exchange feels strategically counterintuitive, doesn't it?
And critically, the fragility wasn't just political talk. It was immediate. It was physical. We got reports almost straight away of a ceasefire violation right there on the ground. Israeli tanks near Netzarim, that's a key military spot south of Gaza City, apparently fired on Palestinians who were trying to move north along the coastal road. This happened despite the declared ceasefire supposedly being in effect.
Yeah, that single incident near Netzarim, it just underlines a massive potential failure. I mean, a declared ceasefire needs incredibly strict command and control, right? Especially when you're talking about people trying to move, potentially humanitarian movement, firing on people trying to use that coastal road, maybe trying to get back to their homes in the north. It suggests one of a few things. Either it was rogue action or a serious miscommunication within the IDF, or more worryingly perhaps, a deliberate attempt by some elements on the ground to just disrupt the whole thing. Whatever the reason, that incident immediately casts doubt on whether that proposed Monday exchange can even happen.
Wow. Okay, so from the almost immediate failure of a negotiated truce in the Middle East, let's shift regions. We're seeing instability manifest elsewhere, particularly this escalating tension between Colombia and the U.S. And this centers on an extremely aggressive claim made by Colombian President Gustavo Petro about U.S. actions in the Caribbean.
This is a major geopolitical moment, no doubt about it. Petro gave quite a detailed account of a boat that was recently bombed by the U.S. He says it was in international Caribbean waters. And he specifically asserted that there are indications the boat, the launch, was Colombian and that it was carrying Colombian citizens. The seriousness of this is really underscored by his demand. He publicly demanded that the families of the victims come forward and report the incident. He seems to want ground truth to counter whatever the U.S. explanation is.
And he didn't just ask for details, did he? He framed the whole thing in the starkest terms possible. Petro directly accused Washington of opening, and these are his words, a new scenario of war in the region. That's a huge accusation. What evidence or what context are we seeing to back up his assertion that this is, quote, a war for oil and not just a standard anti-contraband operation?
Well, this ties into Petro's long-standing critique of U.S. policy in the region, particularly anti-drug policy. He's consistently argued it's flawed, maybe even hypocritical. He's arguing this bombing isn't really about stopping contraband. It's about controlling strategic resource zones, hence the war for oil claim. His line has always been that U.S. policy just ends up criminalizing the small players, the campesinos, the farmers trying to get by, while it simultaneously protects, as he puts it, the large-scale, powerful money laundering structures that make the real profits. So this bombing, in his view, isn't about drugs, it's military action serving underlying economic objectives.
And the human cost is already high. Reports confirm these bombings have left 21 people dead, and Colombia has now officially called these actions assassinations. That's an incredibly strong diplomatic term, isn't it? It lifts it from, say, a botched operation to potentially a state-level crime.
Exactly. And that charge, that framing, it seems to have resonated regionally. We saw pretty quick reactions from regional bodies like CELAC and ALBA. CELAC, that's the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, and ALBA, the Bolivarian Alliance. Both of them put out calls urging respect for peace in the region. When these big political and diplomatic blocs get involved, it tells you that Petro's accusation is being taken very seriously across Latin America. It turns what might have seemed like a localized bombing into a major hemispheric argument about sovereignty and foreign military intervention.
Okay, let's bring the focus closer to home now. Transitioning from those high-stakes international flashpoints to some specific challenges around security and public safety right here and in the region, starting with something quite granular but important, I think, from El Salvador, a specific case involving dangerous driving.
Yeah, what caught my eye about this DUI case was just how specific the details were. It really underlines how seriously these offenses are being treated, it seems. We have the full name, Mario Alberto Ventura Gomez, 33 years old. He was detained while driving his motorcycle under the influence of alcohol. This was in the district of El Rosario, which is in La Paz Centro.
And the breathalyzer result they reported is genuinely shocking. 235 degrees of alcohol content. I mean, that's not just impaired, that's way beyond. That's approaching levels where you worry about alcohol poisoning. He's now facing charges for dangerous driving. And this one incident, while it's local, it does highlight that persistent public safety challenge with impaired driving, even while the government's focus might be on broader security strategies.
And speaking of broader security, there's confirmation of what looks like a win for regional cooperation against gangs. Guatemala handed over a pretty significant individual known as Teltusa to El Salvador. This person is confirmed as a member of the Barrio 18 gang, and apparently he'd originally been captured over Mexico.
Right, that transfer route, Mexico to Guatemala to El Salvador, that's a crucial piece of information, isn't it? It confirms there's this robust multi-country system working to target the transnational networks of these criminal groups. It shows that even if gang members try to flee the country, the regional security apparatus is sharing information and coordinating extraditions to make sure they face justice back here.
Shifting gears slightly to high-level political security in the region, we have to mention the reported attempt on the life of the Ecuadorian president, Daniel Noboa. He apparently survived an attack where gunshots were fired at his vehicle. I mean, that's an immediate and really alarming sign of the political volatility down to the Andes right now.
Yeah, that's deeply unsettling. An attack on a sitting head of state is always a major national security crisis. And importantly, the Minister of Environment and Energy, Inés Manzano, she filed a formal complaint about it afterwards. She's alleging it was an attempted assassination. That suggests they're treating it not as some random act of violence, but as a politically motivated attack aimed at destabilizing the government.
Bringing it back to local infrastructure here in El Salvador, there's an important public safety alert out. The Ministry of Public Works, the MOP, they've been monitoring and have now actually closed the Mirador, the viewpoint, at the Periférico Gerardo Barrios. Now, for anyone unfamiliar, the Periférico is a major, relatively new, high-profile bypass project. So the reason for the closure, the appearance of structural cracks, grietas, that's particularly concerning. It raises questions about construction standards, quality control,
Absolutely. When new essential infrastructure starts showing signs of failure like that, it really tests public trust, doesn't it? And alongside that kind of reactive closure, we're also seeing some proactive planning for other potential disasters. The San Salvador Mayor's office announced a big earthquake drill, a simulacro, for October 10th. This is happening in the Barrio San Jacinto area. So if you're listening and you're in that area, you need to know there will be specific street closures starting at 8 a.m. tomorrow for this drill.
Okay, now let's look at the health sector for a moment. There seems to be this persistent issue of patient confusion at González Hospital, which is a major hospital here in the capital. And this confusion is apparently a direct result of them transferring various medical specialties recently. This logistical shuffle is forcing some patients into, a frustrating journey. They might have to travel between multiple hospitals just to get the coordinated care they need. That kind of inefficiency, it creates real barriers and frustration.
Yeah, you can imagine. And on the transit front, the government has stepped in to provide some clarity, at least. They've formally set the prices for 9 specific collective bus routes, so that should help stabilize costs for people using those particular lines. However, this is happening while there's a much deeper crisis brewing in the transport sector overall, which I think we're going to get into more detail on shortly.
Right. Just to wrap up this section on government actions and policy, let's quickly flag a fiscal initiative. The Ministry of Hacienda, the finance ministry, has put forward a proposal for a new 60-day fiscal amnesty. Now, these amnesties are pretty common tools governments use, right? To encourage people and businesses to pay up outstanding debts without facing penalties. But what's noteworthy about this proposal is its scope. It's apparently set to explicitly include traffic violators.
Oh, that's interesting. By bringing traffic violators into a fiscal amnesty, it sounds like the Hacienda might be trying a dual strategy. Maximize collecting revenue from all those unpaid fines, while also maybe offering some temporary relief to citizens, kind of resetting the enforcement slate after the 60 days are up. It's a temporary measure, but it could have some significant financial implications down the line.
Transitioning now more fully into the structural reality of the country, we've got some fresh data points on El Salvador's economy and demographics, and they really highlight, both some impressive gains and some pretty profound challenges.
Let's start with education, because that's arguably the bedrock for any developing economy's future, right? The latest household survey revealed a statistic that, it needs a moment to really sink in. The average years of study in El Salvador only reaches the 7th grade level, just 7th grade on average. That single number probably tells us more about the nation's future workforce capacity, its potential for maybe moving into higher tech industries, than almost any budget figure we'll discuss today.
Absolutely. A 7th grade average fundamentally means that the majority of the population is entering the workforce without even completing secondary education. That just limits the skills base available for higher value jobs. It's critical context when we talk about economic growth. But alongside that, we do see some positive signs, indicators of increasing wealth, maybe mobility. For instance, the number of households that own a vehicle grew by 5.5% in 2024. That means the total number is now over 489,000 households with a vehicle.
Okay, 5.5% growth in vehicle ownership. That sounds like a pretty strong indicator of maybe an expanding middle class, increased consumer spending power. Yet the overall economic outlook still seems quite cautious. Predictions confirm that El Salvador's GDP will grow, yes, but analysts are noting that the country remains, quote, relegated, basically lagging behind other nations in Central America when you compare regional economic performance. So growth is happening, but maybe slower than its neighbors.
Yeah, and you see this kind of duality reflected in the national balance sheet numbers too. First, a definite positive. International reserves grew by a really impressive 59% through September. And this surge is specifically attributed to an agreement that was recently reached with the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. That big boost in reserves is vital especially for a dollarized economy like El Salvador's. It helps build confidence and stability.
Wow, 59% growth in reserves is huge. But what kind of conditions typically come attached to those IMF agreements, and how does that good news stack up against the national debt picture?
Well, the conditions usually involve things like fiscal consolidation, transparency measures, that sort of thing. But the crucial counterpoint you raise is the ongoing burden of pension debt. That has just continued its steady climb, increasing by another $444 million through August alone. So you got this picture. External financial injections boosting the reserves, which looks good, while these internal obligations, especially to future retirees, keep swelling. It's a classic financial tightrope walk for the government.
Okay, let's shift to public works and this massive commitment we're seeing towards healthcare infrastructure. The plan for the new National Hospital Network sounds colossal. The proposed budget just for its operation in 2026 is substantial, $177 million.
And importantly, this isn't just about building shiny new hospitals. It's about the people needed to run them. That $177 million is directly tied to creating 3,229 new permanent positions plazas just for this network's operation. And the compensation details give us an idea of how they plan to staff it. Total remuneration comes to $59 million. And the salaries for these new network jobs, they range wildly, from a baseline of about $500 up to $8,500 a month, presumably for highly specialized roles.
That very wide salary range, $500 to $8,500, it definitely suggests they're trying to attract top-tier medical specialists, maybe lure some back who've left, while at the same time creating hundreds, maybe thousands of entry-level and mid-level clinical and admin jobs. It's a huge investment, clearly designed to completely modernize the public health system.
Right. Now contrast that massive planned investment with the simultaneous crisis that seems to be unfolding in the public transport sector. The rubro, the actual business of running buses, appears to be collapsing for many operators. Transport entrepreneurs are apparently now so financially squeezed, they're resorting to selling off their buses online.
Selling buses online? Wow, the numbers sound alarming too. Their own estimates suggest over 1,700 buses, which they say represents about 11% of the entire national fleet, will just cease circulation by late 2025 or early 2026. Now, for you listening, 11% fewer buses means potentially thousands of commuters suddenly losing their main way to get around. That could cripple movement in cities. Why is the business suddenly so unprofitable for them?
Well, the sources point to a combination of factors, it seems. Rising operating costs, especially fuel prices, obviously. That's coupled with rigid government-set bus fares that apparently don't allow them to cover those rising costs. And then there's the economic pressure of just maintaining older, less efficient bus fleets. So the government sets the price, but that doesn't fix the underlying financial squeeze the operators are facing. It's basic economics leading to what looks like a looming public transit crisis because the market is contracting.
And speaking of transport infrastructure, adding another layer of uncertainty, the Ministry of Public Works, the MOP, has officially postponed the arrival date for those highly anticipated new buses coming from China. We don't know the reason for the delay from this material, but regardless, it just adds more doubt to a sector that's already, as you said, hemorrhaging assets and capacity. The infrastructure challenges really reveal that duality of the Salvadoran reality right now, don't they?
Yeah, it connects right back to that theme we keep seeing. Enormous, ambitious planned spending on things like health and national capacity. Alongside these simultaneous contractions, structural delays, and apparent failures in critical existing sectors that people rely on every day, like public transport. It's a real contrast.
Okay, let's lighten the mood just a little bit now and move over to culture and sports. We'll start with one of the biggest global recognitions of the year, the Nobel Prize in Literature for 2025.
Yes, the award this year went to the Hungarian author Laszlo Krasznahorkai. And the Swedish Academy citation, the reason they gave is particularly interesting, I thought. They recognized him, and I quote, for his compelling and visionary work that, amidst apocalyptic terror, reaffirms the power of art.
Amidst apocalyptic terror reaffirms the power of art. Wow, that citation feels particularly relevant, doesn't it? Given the world we've just spent time discussing, consumed by conflict and instability. Krasznahorkai's work, it's often praised for these really complex, dark, sweeping stories about societal decay and decline. So this award really cements his status as a major voice in contemporary European literature.
Absolutely. Now, turning our attention to regional sports, the focus seems to be squarely on the El Salvador national team, the Selecta. They've had a couple of important personnel updates and one pretty major scare involving their key goalkeeper.
Right. The alarm was around Mario González, the national team keeper. He apparently had to leave a training session early. Reports initially suggested it was due to a fright or maybe a minor injury. That immediately caused concern about his availability for upcoming games, obviously, because a reliable goalkeeper is just fundamental.
Definitely. But on a more positive note for the team's attack, Nathan Ordaz has officially joined the squad, and he's confirmed to be fit and ready to play. That's a pretty significant addition, especially when you consider he was recently named on one of those prestigious lists of top prospects in Major League Soccer, MLS. His presence should give the Selecta lineup a real boost, technically and maybe even aspirationally.
Good news for the Selecta then. Beyond El Salvador, though, the wider football world is mourning. Miguel Ángel Russo, the highly respected former coach of Boca Juniors in Argentina, has passed away. He was 69. A real loss marks the end of a very influential coaching career, particularly in Argentina and South American football.
Yeah, sad news indeed. And just quickly on the international sports stage, a couple of updates confirming how seasons are ending for some and continuing for others. In baseball, the New York Yankees were eliminated from the playoffs by the Toronto Blue Jays, so their season's over much earlier than their fans hoped, I'm sure. Meanwhile, in tennis, Novak Djokovic just keeps rolling on. He reached his 10th semifinal at the Shanghai Masters, just another milestone confirming he's still very much at the elite level of the sport.
Okay, finally in sports, we have to touch on this persistent and frankly worrying uncertainty that continues to hang over the Central American Games, which are scheduled for 2025. Yamil Bukele, who's a key figure in regional sports administration, he raised some really serious concerns recently. He stated quite definitively that, quote, "There is no organizing committee that takes responsibility for the CA Games in Guatemala."
Yeah, that's a pretty devastating statement, isn't it? It suggests the problem isn't just, financial hiccups or logistical delays. It points to a fundamental failure of governance, a lack of organizational structure for the games in Guatemala. It casts really serious doubt on whether the entire competition scheduled for next year can even happen if there's no official body taking leadership and accountability.
It's a major cloud of uncertainty. But despite that official doubt, El Salvador seems to be pressing ahead with its own preparations regardless. The Salvadoran Olympic Committee, COES, and the National Sports Institute, INDES, they held a ceremony, delivered the national flag to the athletes. They even named Ivan Noches and Diego Calix as the official flag bearers for the Games in Guatemala 2025. It shows the athletes and organizers here are still operating with, dedicated hope, I guess, that the event will somehow pull through against the odds. All right, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's try to pull together the biggest takeaways from this pretty extensive deep dive into yesterday's and today's headlines.
Yeah, looking back over everything, the material really reveals a world, and maybe El Salvador specifically, operating under these intense, often conflicting pressures. You see profound contradictions, both globally and right here, within the country's own policy framework.
Okay, so takeaway number one has to be the extreme geopolitical volatility and contradiction on the international stage. That immediate challenge to the Israel-Hamas deal, the firing near Netzarim, shows how quickly official agreements can be undercut, both by political opposition like Smotrich's statements and by incidents happening right there on the ground. And at the same time, you have these incredibly charged accusations from Colombia's President Petro against the U.S., framing that Caribbean bombing as a war for oil, resulting in assassinations. I mean, that signals a potentially sharp new escalation in hemispheric conflict. It goes way beyond just routine anti-drug operations.
Exactly. Then domestically, takeaway two is the Salvadoran reality as a study in duality. On one hand, the government's committing to massive, really ambitious projects. That $177 million budget and over 3,000 new jobs for the National Hospital Network is a prime example. But simultaneously, the country is grappling with these really fundamental weaknesses. That critically low national education average, just 7th grade, is huge. You have infrastructure concerns like the Grietas closing the Periférico viewpoint, and this deeply troubled public transport sector where maybe 11% of buses could disappear because it's just not profitable anymore.
It's a stark contrast. And finally, takeaway three seems to be the continued acute focus on accountability and enforcement. We saw it in the detailed reporting of Mario Alberto Ventura Gomez's arrest for dangerous driving with that extreme alcohol level. And we saw it in the success of regional cooperation, bringing back the Barrio 18 gang member Taltusa from Mexico via Guatemala. It shows these ongoing operations targeting both high-profile transnational crime and also those essential day-to-day public safety issues.
Right. So if we try to connect all this back to the bigger picture for you, the listener, think about this. You have the Israeli minister openly calling for the complete eradication of Hamas after the hostages are hopefully released. You have President Petro claiming there's a fundamental war for oil happening in the Caribbean. In both situations, the core high-stakes political and economic goals of the major players seem fundamentally opposed to the idea of lasting peace or de-escalation. So it really raises an important question for you to think about. How sustainable is any announced international peace deal or ceasefire when the key players involved explicitly state or clearly signal that their real intention might just be to use the pause to regroup, rearm, and then relaunch the conflict based on their